The sea was the color of bruised milk, a viscous expanse that frothed and hissed against the living walls of the city. Where once waves had carried fish and coral, now they bore only petroleum rainbows and shreds of plastic that clicked together like broken teeth. From that slurry rose the arches, towering bioluminescent skyscrapers, coaxed from engineered coral DNA, their exoskeletons pulsing with faint turquoise light. The arches loomed higher than any steel tower ever forged, and, unlike metal, they grew, creeping upward day by day, cell by coral cell, fed by nutrients siphoned from the poisoned water itself. To stand in the arches was to live inside an impossible cathedral, each ribbed wall and arching buttress a testament to genetic precision. The elites called their city Ikion, a name lifted from some old poem about foam-born saints. Beneath the guarded gates and security membranes, the privileged dined on vat-grown grouper and broadcast their grievances about humidity. Above them, in penthouse lofts of quartz-lined coral, the most powerful families directed the next stage of growth, like gardeners pruning an ever-budding rose. Clinging to the exterior, plastered against the enormous pillars and cantilevered ridges that jutted over the toxic swells, were the barnacle towns. Whole generations had been born on those terraces of desperation, their homes twisted from scavenged driftwood, rusted hull panels, and lengths of polymer rope hauled from the water's floating graveyards. They called themselves the Shellkin, outsiders, parasites, every elite word used to describe them stuck like tar. But the Shellkin endured because there was nowhere else to go. The ocean beyond was a death sentence. The coral citadel above was a locked vault. Marek had never stood on the marble walkways of Ekion, but he knew the ridges and folds of its exterior better than he knew his own calloused hands. He could feel when the living walls flexed, could sense storms through the shudder that traveled up the coral's vascular lattice. At 18, he'd mastered the art of finding purchase where no ladder reached. He kept a belt of knives and a pouch for salvage slung across his chest as he prowled the precipices, collecting the city's cast-offs. The best salvage was wiring. When a gust from last week's hurricane cracked one of Ikion's dorsal outcrops, a gasket of fiber-optic veins had spilled out and snagged on a ventilation spine, dangling like luminous intestines over the slums. Marek cut them loose in darkness, listening to alarms echo far above. By dawn, he'd traded 3 fingers' length of bright filament for a week's ration of filtered water. He might have earned more, but he needed to be quick. Daylight was when the stalkers came. Stalkers were not Ekion's peacekeepers. Those patrolled within. Stalkers were mercenaries hired for exterior control. Bio-armored men and women trained to move across living coral with grappling spurs. They wore helmets that sprouted long glass needles, sensors tuned to body heat, heartbeats, ammonia, traces in sweat. Stalkers spoke little. They preferred to let their electrified harpoons talk for them. Any shellkin caught too high on the wall or too low in the acid surf was target practice. That morning, Marek navigated along a spiral ridge the shellkin called the Snail, eyes scanning for a safe path to market. A damp haze wrapped the city, erasing the horizon so that sea and sky seemed fused into one pale wound. From a fissure above, a knot of elevator pods slid downward inside the coral's translucent sheath. A trickle of curiosity stirred in him. The arch's elevators rarely paused at low levels. When the pod's membrane dilated, someone stepped out onto a maintenance balcony. A girl in a suit woven from silver micromesh, no older than Marek. Her hair a white ribbon against the glowing walls. She held a tablet in one hand and looked around as if she'd stepped off a map into unmapped space. Too high, Marek thought. A single misstep, and she would tumble through clouds of toxic mist into waves that burned flesh. Elite or not, the sea would flay her to the bone. She leaned over the railing, scanning the barnacle maze below. Then her footing slipped on the damp coral. Marek felt his muscles move before fear could. He sprang, embedded a climber's dagger into a seam, swung out, and caught her wrist. A faint gasp escaped her throat, but no scream. Marek braced himself, her weight jarring his shoulder. With measured breaths, he found a second hold and hauled her back to the balcony, where they collapsed. For a full heartbeat, they stared at each other, still linked by panic. If guards arrived, Marek would be cuffed before he could blink. He forced himself upright. "You shouldn't be out here," he muttered, eyes already searching for escape routes. She sat up, brushing coral dust from her palms. "And you shouldn't exist here," she said, not with cruelty, but with bewildered amazement. "You climbed across 20 meters of exposed ridge. No safety gear, no exoskin." "Shellkin don't get safety gear," Marek replied. Her gaze tracked the scars on his forearms, the corrosive pits where sea spume had kissed skin. "My name is Lyra." She offered a hand. Marek flinched, expecting a tranquilizer dart, but she simply waited. He took her hand, surprised at its softness. "Marek." Footsteps thudded inside the elevator column. Security. Marek whirled. Lyra's eyes widened. Without ceremony, she shoved her tablet into his salvage pouch. "Go," she whispered. "If they see you, they'll—" Her sentence evaporated in static as the balcony gate slid open. 2 armored peacekeepers strode out. Marek vaulted the railing, descended 5 meters, and melted into the maze. From below, he saw Lyra calmly greet the guards, deflecting their suspicion with practiced charm. He exhaled, adrenaline still drumming. That night, under the dim glow of barnacle lanterns, Marek studied Lyra's tablet. Its screen came alive at the touch of his thumbprint, as if waiting. Rows of genetic models rotated in holographic space. Coral nuclei, spliced with human gene markers, schematics of neural relay sequences embedded in living stone. A diary option pulsed at the edge. He hesitated, then opened the log. "Trial 47, Lyra's recorded voice echoed from the small speaker, warm yet urgent. "Expressing regret. The new stratum of living quarters shows accelerated tumor formation. Residents of level 5 report increased migraines and hemorrhaging. The board insists anomalies are routine. They're lying. If the shell fails, it will fracture into the sea. We're holding the rot inside a giant egg." The recording clicked off. Marek stared. Elites suffering. The idea gnawed at the edges of outrage he'd fostered his whole life. Then he remembered the walls' subtle tremor, the way their luminosity had dimmed this season. Maybe the coral skyscrapers were sick. Another file decrypted itself. A topographical map overlaid with infection vectors. The diseased zones mirrored areas where the arches had grown densest, packed with affluent families. Below them, the shell that supported the barnacle towns appeared riddled with microfissures. If the coral cracked under the weight of rot, everything, elite palaces, barnacle huts, and all, would plunge. A storm front rolled in the following day, painting the sky green. Marek climbed to a ledge outside the snail, where gullies funneled acid rain into scavenger tanks. He found Kala, an old shellkin matriarch with hair like driftwood and eyes sharp enough to split lies. She was administering antibiotics to a fevered child. Marek recounted what he'd discovered. Kala listened, expression unreadable. "We always knew their paradise would rot," she said. "But if it collapses, so do we." "Lyra might help," Marek murmured. "She risked punishment to warn someone. Us, I think." Kala's gaze flicked to the storm clouds. One girl inside the cage can't open every bar, but information might. She handed Marek a datapod wrapped in waxed cloth. This holds every shell-kin map of the Arch's sublevels. Give it to the girl. Make the elite truth collide with ours. Maybe the impact knocks sense into both. Marek returned to the maintenance balcony at dusk. Lyra waited, her silver suit streaked with algae stains. No guards. The corals around her pulsed with dim bioluminescence, making her skin appear haunted. Your board will notice their missing tablet, he said. I told them it dissolved in the rain, she replied. They treat the outside like a myth. Nothing out here survives anyway. A tremor rippled through the wall, as if to underscore her words. Did you watch the logs? Yes, I brought something for you. He offered the waxed bundle. She opened it, revealing chaotic schematics of tunnels, drainage arteries, hidden access chimneys. Your people mapped the bone gut of the city, she whispered, awed. With this, we could irrigate the infected zones, flush toxins out. Or evacuate, Marek said. Lyra looked over the ledge at the barnacle sprawl. We'll never convince the board. They profit from denial. But if we demonstrate that the shellkin can breach any chamber, they'll be forced to sit down, or unleash the stalkers. Then we do it quietly, she concluded. A proof of vulnerability so elegant they can't trace the leak. They agreed on a plan. Marek would guide Lyra through exterior arteries to a diagnostic core deep below the penthouses, where a catalytic pump circulated nutrient gel through the arches. If disease thrived in that flow, they could seed nanobots to map the infection in real time. Data undeniable. Night after night they met, descending through narrow chutes slick with mucus algae. Marek led. Lyra recorded. They avoided Guardian drones whose sonar clicks tickled the skull. Along the way, they shared stories. Marek of his mother's death after a stalker raid. Lyra of her father's rise to the board by patenting the very gene weaves now turning cancerous. She hated him for treating the skyscraper like a stock index. Hated herself for continuing his work. Marek listened without judgment. Anger, he knew, could be tempered into purpose. On the 7th night, they reached the catalytic pump chamber, a cathedral of churning organelles. Transparent tubes as wide as tree trunks spiraled upward, glowing with milky fluid. Within, flurries of engineered plankton spun like galaxies. Maintenance mechs crawled along the pipes, injecting enzymes. Lyra accessed a console, slipped in shellkin nanobot canisters. Alarms stayed silent. Data streamed onto her wrist pad. Tumor density, bioelectric shorting, structural fatigue. Graphs spiked into catastrophe. She exhaled. This is it. Proof. A rumble shook the chamber. Then a voice boomed over the intercom. Step away from the console. Stalkers emerged on ledges above, harpoons crackling. At their head stood a man whose cheekbones mirrored Lyra's. Chairman Voss, her father. Lyra, he called, voice trained to charm investors. Come home. You're being manipulated by cliff rats. Marek felt every insult like salt on wounds. Lyra's shoulders quivered, but she stood fast. You manipulated everyone, she answered. Look at the data. The archers are dying. Ikion evolves, Voss retorted. Some mutations are pruned. You, unfortunately, are one. He nodded to the stalkers. Marek grabbed Lyra's wrist. They sprinted along a catwalk as harpoons sizzled. Fluid splashed where metal spikes punctured pipes, releasing bluish spray. Toxic mist thickened. Marek cut through a service grate into a vein-like crawl space. Behind them, alarms erupted. They emerged in a storage vault stacked with spore canisters. Lyra hacked a terminal, sealing bulkheads to slow pursuit. "My father won't relent," she said, chest heaving. "He'll kill half the shells to prove himself right." "Then we have to take away his bargaining chip," Merrick replied. He pointed to a central spore vat labeled Myco-Cleanse Delta. "What's that?" "A fungal scrub. It digests petrochemicals." Her eyes widened at the thought forming. If released in controlled doses, it could detox the sea around the base, relieve pressure. But uncontrolled, "It eats the city's outer membrane," Merrick finished. A plan surfaced, cold and brutal. Trigger a strategic release to force evacuation talks. Not total collapse, just enough to scare the board into compromise. Lyra hesitated. Moral weight pressed on her. Merrick placed a hand on her shoulder. "They already fired first," he said, voice steady. "We choose where the damage lands." Together they recalibrated output valves, programming spores to ignite along subsurface strata farthest from barnacle homes. Before activating, Lyra uploaded the diagnostic data to every internal network node, including public channels once reserved for elite commerce. Screens across Echion blinked from luxury ads to flashing graphs declaring imminent structural failure. Panic blossomed through marble halls. Stalkers broke through the vault door. Merrick yanked the manual override. The spore vats ruptured with a muffled pop, releasing clouds of pale dust that raced through ventilation shafts toward the outer foundations. Merrick and Lyra fled downward, guided by shellkin maps. When they emerged onto the snail ridge, dawn was bleeding over the horizon. Below, the ivory pillars of Echion's lower tiers darkened, threads of brown creeping like veins as spores feasted on pollutants embedded in coral. Steam hissed where reactions heated the wet stone. Sirens howled. Elevator pods clogged with elites descended toward emergency pontoons. But halfway down, many pods froze, servos gummed by fungal residue. On barnacle balconies, shellkin families watched a city convulse. Fear trembled with vengeful satisfaction. Kala appeared beside Marek, leaning on a staff. "You shook the giant," she observed. "Enough to bring it to the table?" Marek asked. "If not, it will fall and drown us all," she answered. A broadcast signal crackled from an overhead drone. Chairman Voss's face materialized, edges fuzzy with static. "Evacuation will proceed in stages," he announced. "All residents, including exterior squatters, will receive transport to the Horizon Flotilla until integrity is restored." Merrick exchanged a stunned look with Lyra. He hadn't expected an olive branch so quickly. Then Voss added, "Tampering with the substrate is punishable by vaporization. The saboteurs will surrender within the hour." Lyra stepped forward, glaring at the drone. "Tell him we accept," she said, so only Merrick could hear. "But on our terms." She handed him her wrist pad. "Broadcast our demand. Shared governance of restoration efforts. Shellkin engineers have the maps. Without them, the arches remain cancerous." Merrick swallowed. Negotiating seats at the same table that had mocked them felt like stepping into fire. But if they refused, the spores might spiral out of control. He climbed onto a ballast beam, tapped the broadcast relay on the pad. His voice carried across open channels. "Chairman Voss, this is Merrick of the Shellkin. We hold the keys to repair routes. Accept a joint council chosen equally from arches and barnacles, or watch your dynasty sink." He paused, "And Lyra stands with us." Static swam through the feed. Voss's expression flickered from fury to calculation. 30 minutes, he said finally, to present your counsel." The drone banked away. Lyra exhaled, tears blurring her pale eyes. "He won't forgive me." He doesn't have to, Merrick replied. He just has to listen. They organized a delegation. Kala, several Shellkin riggers, a young medic, and Lyra as liaison. Merrick refused a seat, choosing instead to coordinate evac routes where elites mingled with barnacle residents on makeshift pontoon bridges. Distrust soured the air, but survival pressed them forward. Over the next days, the fungal bloom ebbed under calibrated ultraviolet pulses. Detoxified seawater turned from bruised milk to cloudy jade. Marine larvae, dormant for years, drifted in like flecks of ash. Scientists from both castes examined them with wonder. Ikion's walls, though scarred, held firm. Inside council chambers carved from coral chambers, labor representatives mapped restoration. Some discussions erupted into shouting, yet no harpoons were fired. One afternoon, Merrick crossed a provisional causeway to meet Lyra on an inspection platform. Work crews dangled below, spraying anti-tumor enzymes into cracks. Above, drones carried seed pods of engineered kelp to plant new reef rings that would filter toxins. Your council passed the housing amendment, Lyra said, wind reddening her cheeks. Vacant penthouses will convert into clinics and schools. She smiled, hesitant. Feels unreal. The sea still wants us dead, Marek reminded gently. But now we face it together. She squeezed his hand. Together then. Weeks rolled into months. Coral architects, both elite scholars and barnacle tinkers, redesigned load distribution, so future growth arced outward, creating terraced tiers accessible to anyone. Barnacle huts became sanctioned microdocks. Children from inside and outside attended the same floating classrooms, learning genetic coding beside knot tying. On the anniversary of the spore release, a celebration unfolded on interconnected decks above waters, slowly clearing to reveal hints of blue. Lanterns carved from reclaimed plastics bobbed in the air, filled with helium harvested from thermal vents. Music. Drums on upturned barrels. Flutes carved from conduit. Twined with synthesized strings projected from elite databanks. The rhythm blended high and low, salvage and luxury. Marek stood beside Lyra at the railing, watching lights shimmer across newly detoxed waves. The arches behind them no longer glowed with the arrogant uniformity of corporate design. Instead, patches of fresh coral blossomed in diverse pigments, shaped by hybrid engineers who favored function over prestige. A living city, truly living, not just in biology, but in spirit. Do you miss the old skyline? Marek asked Lyra. She traced the horizon with a fingertip. The old skyline was beautiful, but it was hollow, like a seashell with the animal rotted away. What rises now isn't as symmetrical, but it beats. She touched her chest. I can feel it. Can you? Marek listened. He felt tremors through the rail, engines of water pumps, footsteps of revelers, vibrations of music. They resonated in his bones, the way storms once had. Yet the hum was no longer ominous. It was communal, a layered chorus forming the city's pulse. He nodded. Fireworks of bioluminescent spores erupted overhead, cascading in hues of jade and violet. Children squealed, elders clasped hands. People who once spat across chasms now shared fermented algae, drink from the same cups. Somewhere above, Chairman Voss watched the union he had tried to prevent. Marek did not know if the man felt defeat or relief. It mattered less each day. Lyra leaned close. The barnacles saved the corals. Funny universe? Barnacles are corals, Marek said with a grin. Stubborn, hard-shelled, holding tight in every storm. And corals can be barnacles, rooted yet reaching outward. They kissed, not with the fever of rebellion, but with the quiet certainty of survivors who have chosen to rebuild rather than merely endure. Below them, in waters that had long known only poison, a school of silver fry darted between newborn polyps. Their scales caught the lantern glow, scattering coins of light across the surface. Witnesses to proof that even a toxic sea could find renewal if those who lived above and clung outside learned at last to grow together.